Hello, greetings, and welcome to Awake in the Age of Revealing. This is Douglas Michael. The title for the segment today is The Difference Between the I Am Movement and Being Your True Self. And real quick, ladies and gentlemen, a huge thank you to all my new subscribers, in fact, to all of my subscribers. And just to let you know, there's been a lot of anomalies with YouTube. I've gotten several complaints that people have been auto-unsubscribed. It won't let me post these videos as public. I will, in the settings, set it to public, and then it automatically switches it to private. So please check the channel back often, because Endall and I are just getting started. We have many, many more video presentations to come. So with that in mind, we'll get started. Ladies and gentlemen, in my Humanity Beyond Duality presentation, I introduced the principle of one recognizing that they do not have to play the ego game of I am this or I am that. The hyper over-identification, with the roles that we play. We simply need to recognize our spirit self within and realize simply that I am. In my video, Discernment and the Point of Distinction, I used the analogy of a minefield in describing how every avenue of belief has been hijacked by the inorganic, ascended master consciousnesses in order to steal the truth of spirit and bend it to their own designs. The I Am movement was one of those preemptive strikes, and I have to relate to my listeners that what I am trying to help them understand about their spirit consciousness within, the spirit I Am, has absolutely nothing to do with this I Am movement created back in the 1930s by Guy Ballard, a proponent of theosophy and a huckster con man. This video presentation is going to be another lesson in discernment. When we look up the definition of discernment in Webster's dictionary, we find that discernment is 1. The quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure, skill in discerning, and 2. An act of perceiving or discerning something. With this definition, we find the basis of spiritual discernment, and that is the ability to see through what may initially be obscure or hidden. This definition also illustrates that discernment is also an act of perceiving, which is the quality to see through something that may appear to be one way, but in actuality is something hidden or obscure. Now, Wikipedia expands on this definition and says that discernment is the ability to obtain sharp perceptions or to judge well, or the activity of doing so. Now, this is exactly the kind of discernment that everyone needs to develop to sharpen their skills of discernment when they are advancing their consciousness. We live in a world that is constantly in your face. To the vast majority of people, they believe that what they see on a superficial level of first cognition awareness is all there is to see. This is what they consider reality to be, and it is the only reality that they are presently willing to accept. Now, granted, others have developed some skill in discernment to be able to perceive certain aspects of symbolic representations, or metaphors in the films we watch or the books we read. But spiritual discernment requires that we move into a more refined state of cognitive discernment. To advance our consciousness, we can't simply rely on the superficial impressions of what we think reality is if we hope to advance ourselves. Two things may look to be superficially alike, but it is only through detecting the nuance or subtleties that we can discern the difference. Now, let's take a qualified definition of discernment from the Grace to You webpage and see what the Christian definition of discernment says. In its simplest definition, discernment is nothing more than the ability to decide between truth and error, right and wrong. Discernment is the process of making careful distinctions in our thinking about truth. In other words, the ability to think with discernment is synonymous with an ability to think biblically. I think this definition kind of speaks for itself in regard to its myopic bias of what Christian discernment entails. When we step into New Age thinking, we find a similar myopic definition of discernment whereby the truth the New Age believer is supposed to discern is whether it is a doctrine of light or of dark, and whether it makes the believer feel good by emotionally, not energetically, resonating with the message. As an example of this, we only need to look to the channeler of Cryon, Lee Carroll, on his Lightworker's Handbook series to see his definition of channeling in order to see this same Christian-oriented definition that permeates the New Age. Channeling is the divine inspired words or energy of God as imparted to humans by humans. And from a public post on the starseed.net website, one of their posters proposed that there is no right or wrong, and that making such judgments is simply a matter of lacking comprehension or discernment. Now that we have these observations in hand, let's take a look at discernment. In this last paraphrased passage, we are confronted once again with that New Age doctrine of being non-judgmental, and also the morally relativistic belief that there is no right or wrong. This is the idea that there is no difference between an action that is correct, a harmonious action, and an incorrect action, one that trespasses against others. This is exactly the doctrine formulated by the Ascended Master branch of the Cosmic Consortium to keep people from making the value judgments that genuine spiritual discernment requires. In the realm of spiritual understanding, there is truth that will feed and empower you, and then there are lies that will disempower and misdirect you down the blind alleys of mystical beliefs and doctrines of dependency. If you ever wanted an example for a distinction between good and evil, then this is it. It amounts to the difference between cognitive freedom and cognitive tyranny. It is either one or the other, and no one can be both free and a slave at the same time. You cannot serve two masters. If, in the face of this truth, you can remotely hold a position of moral relativism and not make the value judgment that one is good and one is evil, then you may as well stop watching this video now, because you just ain't getting it. The reason I have gone to such pains to point out these differences in the interpretation of discernment is because of the fact that despite all the lip service given to the word discernment in the spiritual marketplace, few have really developed the keen discernment and qualities of judgment necessary to make this simple distinction. Am I being judgmental? Hell yes, and you should be too, because this type of deconstruction of the meaning of the word discernment will only lead one away from the truth. If you can't develop the wisdom and discernment to see through this mental equivocating, then you have not yet developed the discernment necessary to know the difference, and that is one reason I'm bringing it up in this presentation. As touched on earlier in this presentation, the I Am movement was created by a man named Guy Ballard in 1934. Ballard claims to have received his I Am teachings from an ascended master going by the name of Saint Germain, and his book Unveiled Mysteries was channeled to him by Saint Germain. Wikipedia reports that the ascended master teachings are at the root of the idea that the I Am is the one substance, one energy, one power, one intelligence as the source of all consciousness and creation, as related in his book The Voice of the I Am, published by the Saint Germain Press. It is this idea about a singular governing consciousness which is the creator of life, the universe, and everything that is at the root of all New Age teachings about cosmic oneness. It is this doctrinal belief system which, if you look at with intense discernment, is little removed from the ideas about the singular God of the three major Western religions, and which is forwarded in the Hindu belief of Brahma. This fabricated concept of oneness still leaves our individual consciousness as nothing more than a small part of this overarching concept of some higher controlling principle, whether you call that principle God, I Am, or the flying spaghetti monster. I am going to provide a completely different scenario on how the universe works that defies all of these doctrines of dependency, which all require us to give up our energies to any idea of some kind of higher power that rules the universe. Those who control our consciousness want us subservient to these types of ideas. They want us giving up our personal power as sovereign consciousnesses to their ideas about their self-proclaimed superiority over us. So long as we continue to bow at their altars of belief, thinking that we are lesser beings, they will gladly take our power from us to feed themselves and their bullshit doctrines of docility, moral relativism, fake compassion, and non-judgmentalism. When I refer to I am talking about your spirit self being wholly independent and sovereign from such systems of cognitive enslavement. I'm not remotely referring to this concept of some overarching consciousness of the universe calling itself Ballard's version of I am. Using the analogy of the inorganics laying cognitive mines to prevent the ground crew from relating this message of empowerment, they used Guy Ballard and his theosophist collaborators like Elizabeth Clare Prophet and others to misdirect people away from realizing they are a sovereign spirit, recognizing simply that I am into their bullshit theosophical concept of the mystical I am of dependency. If one has not yet developed keen discernment, when I say I am, one thinks that I am simply parroting this theosophical I am movement nonsense, and the principles are not remotely the same. To advance into second cognition awareness, one has to develop the discernment to detect such subtle differences in meaning. Because we have all been indoctrinated to generally take things at face value, we have not yet developed the intuitive skills to immediately see the subtle nuances in such distinctions unless someone explains the difference to us. If my listeners availed themselves of the opportunity to watch that Debunking David Icke video, then they are starting to realize that the spiritual propaganda of the so-called truth movement is rife with such subtle manipulations. Most people have not figured out the hateful tactics of propaganda and cognitive manipulation. They feel that if someone is telling truths that they can verify, then everything contained in the message of the propaganda artist is equally true. This is where intense discernment is a mandate, and unfortunately, most people have not developed the discernment to know where the truth ends and the propaganda and lies begin, particularly in matters of spirit. That is why I strongly suggest that my subscribers and listeners watch that Debunking David Icke video, because it is such a powerful teaching tool for learning about spiritual discernment on so many levels. There are many New Agers who are finally starting to realize that there is something rotten with the whole Ascended Master control diatribe, yet they have not developed the discernment to perceive that the beliefs they demand to embrace in the face of such obvious cognitive perfidy is part and parcel of the same deception. They have embraced their New Age beliefs so firmly that even though they can see the Ascended Master channeling circus as an area for concern and serious questioning, they have not yet discerned that the beliefs they insist on maintaining were all cut from the same piece of Ascended Master inorganic cloth. It is exactly this type of selective blindness that the egos of the first cognition have generally not developed enough discernment to see. I am offering the observations in this video as another object lesson so my listeners can start to develop their own discernment to see that wherever you turn in ancient religious doctrines as well as modern spirituality, you are continually faced with divine dependency and relinquishing your own personal power to such deceptive lies. It always seems to be based on externalization rather than internalization. In Book 3 of the New Paradigm Messages, Becoming, this dependency syndrome is explained. While mankind is caught up in the delusion of servitude within the belief that the real rewards for obedience are withheld until the end of the lifetime and are to be experienced in another realm, one's personal power is totally compromised. He or she lives in a state of belief that control rests outside of any real personal control. God is the ultimate source of all good, and they themselves are the source of all bad because of disobedience to some known or unknown laws, rules, or regulations that they have broken. Obedience and service are the watchwords of goodness, which is the ideal of life. To further add to the ambiguity of the situation, commitment to obedience and service allows for cruel and inhumane treatment of fellow humans at the discretion of religion and government. Within this system, there is no true freedom for mankind to determine who and what they are. There is no freedom to understand that the God concept as taught is one perpetrated for one purpose only, to enslave and control beings that have the potential of becoming totally equal to and surpassing the evolvement of those who are foisting this enslaving situation on the humans living on this planet. The truth is that we will never find the originating source of this universe or the origin of consciousness. Sometimes we just have to accept what is without backtracking through eternity so we can hope to, knock on the door of God and ask him all of our inane first cognition questions. Questions like, why am I here? Or what's my purpose? Instead of asking those questions, why not just accept it that you are here, move forward from there, and create your own sense of purpose? As human beings living a finite material existence, we always seek beginnings and endings to everything, or at least the ego does. The true self, the spirit, knows that there is no beginning and no end. To mature as a cognitively aware human being, we have to accept the idea that there are some things in the universe for which there is no answer, and that we will never find those answers. It doesn't hurt to ponder such things, and in fact, it could be very expansive to do so, but sometimes we just have to put such quests for finding the infinite creator on the back burner and learn to live with what is and move on from there. As I addressed in my presentation, There Is No Oneness, the universe is not controlled by some singular consciousness that whimsically decides who has a bad hair day and who doesn't. To embrace that concept is to debase the idea of infinity and put it into a finite human first cognition box. To think that we can understand infinity through some bolt of enlightenment is an equally reckless belief. The Earth is projected to be 4 billion years old. If you can't even keep up with all of the human historical events in just, say, the last 300 years, how do you remotely think you can figure out 4 billion years of history? I mean, really, just think about the magnitude of that amount of knowledge. And you really think the human brain is capable of housing that much information? Now, let's extrapolate that to a universal scale. The 4 billion years of Earth's existence is nothing but a drop in the bucket when measuring the age of the universe. Only an ego is so arrogant as to think that it is capable of possessing such vast knowledge. There is no consciousness anywhere in existence that knows everything, so let's just disenchant ourselves from any such idea. If you want a more realistically perceivable aspect of the universe, try and picture this. Don Juan used the analogy that a human being can be perceived as surrounded with an energetic, luminous egg. Through these egg-like bubbles, there are an infinite number of threads that reach out all across creation. If we use this imagery, then we can perceive that as an interactive individual consciousness in an interactive universe, then we each have the capability to tap in or dial into these infinite threads to perceive different worlds and different individual consciousnesses that inhabit those worlds like we inhabit ours. I brought up what Don Juan called the assemblage point in my Explaining Compassion video, which I defined as our individual point of focus when accessing this network of infinite threads that connect our consciousness to the universe at large, not unlike the internet. We can view this infinite variety of threads like the old telephone lines, right, that connected people through the telephone switchboard network. In more modern comparison, we can view those threads to be more, like the virtual connections on the internet. Just as our personal computer can't tap into and display every ounce of information contained on the internet at the same time, neither can our consciousness tap into all of the knowledge of this universal internet at the same instant. Currently, bound by first cognition thinking, our definition of reality is just one of those threads, a single channel on the TV set of our awareness. For all intents and purposes, we have all been watching the same channel our entire lives, and we have not yet developed the wisdom to know that we can change the channel simply by advancing our consciousness and switching to a new one. This is what Don Juan meant by moving our assemblage point. Your spirit consciousness is the remote control that, once developed, allows you to change cognitive channels and connect with the universe at large. When using the internet, we have to go to the appropriate web addresses to find the information that we're seeking. Through finding the discipline to move our personal assemblage point, our focal point of transmitting and receiving energy, we are learning to dial into those universal internet channels to find some of the information contained in that vast interactive network. Sometimes these connections can bring us into contact with other beings living elsewhere in the universe, and those who have developed the traits to do so can talk to these beings just like we talk to each other on the phone. What I'm talking about through such two-way conversations is nothing like the one-way nature of channeling, where someone has to move their own consciousness aside and let some other consciousness take over their bodies to transmit their bullshit. Never, ever move aside your consciousness for any entity that demands such a thing in order to communicate with you. Many so-called spiritual teachings, especially modern ones, have been obtained this way. In the long run, you will regret it in one form or another. In an interactive universe such as ours, any being of impeccability, regardless of their frequency or where they come from, will not make contact for a one-sided conversation. We are humans and we may have limitations, but we are not the dictation secretaries for these pompous, inorganic deceivers called the Ascended Masters. If you can get your head around this concept of an interactive, intelligent universe, then you can start to comprehend what awaits our species when we can get past all these doctrines of dependency and feeling that we are lesser beings. We can finally start to perceive how our species has been robbed by the withholding of this knowledge by our cognitive controllers and ministers of the divine, and this realization should right royally piss you off. You're never going to learn how to function in this universal network of infinite information so long as you don't believe that such things are not only possible, but a very real part of the universe that surrounds us. You don't have to have the talent to converse with other beings, for not everyone has that skill. So don't feel disappointed if you find this is not one of your personal skills. Developing your own intuition and learning to trust what you get when your gut instinct tells you it's right is plenty enough to navigate this universal network. Every one of us has that capability within us so long as we can develop the discernment and sensitivity to more actively tap into this universal intuitive network. In light of this perspective, then, I ask my listeners to note the distinct difference in realizing that this self-empowering aspect of your spiritual I am so completely overshadows the doctrine of dependency and subservience of the I am movement doctrines of humility, that the idea of kneeling before some kind of higher power becomes utterly pathetic and laughable. Recognize that your spirit self recognizes no higher form of consciousness than itself. The I am movement, formulated by the alleged ascended masters, appeals to egos who still consider themselves lesser beings, and it also caters to the ego sense of superiority in expressing the belief. Remember, the ego says, I am this or I am that, and it can't realize what your spirit self already knows, simply that I am. I exist. By offering this presentation, I invite my listeners to hone their perceptual awareness and discernment to see the difference between spiritual reality and doctrinalized dependency and subservience channeled down to us by these pompous and arrogant inorganic assholes masquerading as divine guidance, but which only leads to spiritual dependency and cognitive slavery. Again, from the book Becoming, Book 3 of the New Paradigm series, we read, "At this point, the question of the misuse of humanity by its self-appointed overlords returned to the focus of this discussion. As brought forth within the prior discussion, the laws that allow for potentiality to express into manifested reality so that knowledge can be experienced into wisdom and progress provide the basis for this process. The basic law is the law of attraction. Thus, mankind on planet Earth has been influenced from the beginning to maintain the understanding that knowledge and wisdom comes from those of greater and superior knowledge and wisdom. Further, that this knowledge and wisdom is given out to them through adoration and worship of those holding this superior wisdom. As time has passed, this understanding has been manipulated into the belief by humanity that it is vested in an unknowable awareness that has all the attributes as wielded over them by their overlords. These ever-present beings have hidden themselves and operated through this unknowable God, holding humanity hostage, not only for the resources of this planet, but as a last experiment in manipulation and literal entertainment. It has been previously referred to as their own virtual reality computer game. Unfortunately, that is more truth than fiction. Enter religions, externalization beliefs of dependency, ascended masters, source, benevolent ETs that are tripping over themselves to come and rescue humanity from their adolescence and ignorance, and every other lie humanity has bought into to project worship, adoration, and dependency outside of themselves onto some unknowable higher power. It is long past the time for humanity to cast away the chains of this cognitive tyranny, step into the glory of what we truly can become, and create an entire new paradigm based on the knowingness that no consciousness is lesser or greater, that each is self-contained, individuated, and independent. The understanding that I am. Ladies and gentlemen, I extend my gratitude and my heartfelt thanks to any and to all who take the time to push forward in their cognitive awareness, to open their mind and to search for the truth. I want to thank all of my subscribers for taking the time to listen to Awake in the Age of Revealing. Ladies and gentlemen, there is much, much more to come. Again, thank you to all my subscribers, and please check back with the channel frequently because a lot of people seem to be getting auto-unsubscribed. I have nothing to do with that, so please, keep up on the updates. Check back often because they're going to keep coming. We're going to keep on doing this. Endall and I are just getting started. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Doug Michael. Thanks for listening to Awake in the Age of Revealing. And until next time, walk in peace.